I think for as long as I can remember, I was a Nintendo fan like anybody else back in the day. Perhaps nowhere near bigger than most people were at the time, but you normally see me with a Nintendo Game Boy Advance in hand, having played many of the most well-known first-party titles there were to offer, even if the majority of them that I owned were mostly remakes or remasters of their original counterparts. For most people my age, I don't want to talk about my age right now, that's how we experienced the majority of the Nintendo library at the time. Whether it had been Kirby's Nightmare in Dreamland, Yoshi's Island Super Mario Advance 3, or Donkey Kong Country, those games left enough an impression on me that told me that yes, these were indeed what made a video game a video game. Sure, I had a handful of other games that were decent enough on their own, but the Nintendo seal on the box truly meant that you were in for a special treat. As I got a little bit older, I would eventually have a Nintendo 64, GameCube, DS, Wii, 3DS, and a Switch, much later on, skipping the Wii U for obvious reasons. For as long as I could remember, Nintendo was what provided the majority of my gaming experiences as a kid, and with so many hit franchises that have left a mark on all of us, some more than others. Today, that still remains true for the next generation of kids that are gifted a Nintendo Switch, or a hand-me-down Nintendo console, at the very least. You aren't going to find a generation of consoles nearly as iconic or memorable as Nintendo, with such a rich history that would really take a fine-tooth comb to really look into how it all started. I won't get too in-depth with exactly how Nintendo began, but they weren't always a video game company to start with. With origins dating back to the Meiji era of Japan, Nintendo got its start in manufacturing Japanese playing cards, or more formally known as karuta. One of these games that they manufactured, Hanafuda, was sort of the beginning of what they would consider an interactive experience that anybody could learn or pick up to play with others, a virtue that carries on to this very day. Didn't take long for them to bring the concept of video games to another level, no pun intended. You'd soon seen the likes of Mario jumping through a construction site to save his then-girlfriend Pauline from the likes of Donkey Kong. And from there it just took off. We soon got the very first Super Mario Bros. Game, which then led to the introduction of Princess Peach and Bowser, not to mention Mario's brother, Luigi, who was originally just a palette swap of Mario, which was sort of the norm for a while, until they made him distinct enough to be his own character. Then you had Toad, Yoshi, Wario, Daisy, Waluigi, and well, come on, is there anything else that needs to be said here? Mario is a massive franchise in its own right. You've got merchandise, food, costumes, t-shirts, figurines, Lego sets, and a whole ass theme park land dedicated to him. Almost a shrine dedicated to his greatness. Mario has had quite a career for himself that is legendary in its own right. But then you've got many other beloved franchises such as The Legend of Zelda, Kirby, Animal Crossing, Pikmin, Splatoon, and a bunch of other Mario spin-offs, and so much more that I don't think I'd be able to cover all of, just because this isn't that kind of video. Because for as much as I enjoy what Nintendo has had to offer over the years, what we tend to forget about Nintendo is that it operates as a business first. And well, yeah, there's not exactly anything mind-blowing about putting that out in the first place, but I do think it's an aspect of it that more and more people are starting to realize as time goes on. There's plenty of die-hard Nintendo fans out there who don't exactly like to or want to agree with whatever criticism that's thrown their way over the years. When I think back to when I was still in high school, Nintendo Life was kind of my go-to when it came to news about the big end. What stood out to me more than just the information on articles were the comments left underneath them. Now, I should point out that social media was a thing, but nowhere near as big as it is these days, so it wasn't uncommon for most people to communicate with one another through these comment sections or forums, in a time before Discord. So if and whenever there'd been an article discussing a topic that may have painted Nintendo in a less than golden light, those commenters in shining armor were there to protect the billion-dollar company every step of the way. Didn't matter if it was over a DMCA claim, taking a non-profit fan game down, or if it was about a feature or something in a game being removed or absent. The fanboys of the round table were here to ensure you matched their opinion of Nintendo, or else you got dogpiled on. The Nintendo fans were just as bad as any game console fanboy was. PlayStation and Xbox had its fair share of snooty graphics or everything elitist, tossing around every insult in the book, but Nintendo fans were on another level when it came to defending whatever their beloved childhood company did. And well, the things that Nintendo has done in the past reflects exactly how it still operates to this day. For as influential and nostalgic the entire brand of Nintendo has been throughout its 100+ years of existence, it has surely made some of the most baffling choices with how it handles itself. You could also say that perhaps Japanese culture sort of plays a part in all that, or that they feel this need to protect themselves every step of the way, for the sake of self-preservation. The main leadership in charge isn't exactly young either, having to do with the hierarchical workplace culture that society in Japan adheres to without much question. You could also argue that having Miyamoto still around overseeing things is keeping the old end chugging along, but you often have to wonder how much longer that can continue. Many of the folks who work there, again, aren't exactly getting much younger, no matter how good the genetics or the secret fountain of youth may be. Age catches up to all of us, as bleak as it is to say that aloud. You would think that eventually a younger generation would be taking the reins by now, and that seems to be happening at a glacial pace. But even with that said though, the business practices have remained the same, and they probably might continue to be the same, without very many negative consequences to follow suit. This also goes for many of the controversies and questionable choices that they've made throughout the years, ranging from stomping out emulation, to shutting down fan games, to faulty Joy-Cons. They've even been caught playing the whole supply and demand strategy when it comes to the release of the products. It's something that often gets swept under the rug by many staunch Nintendo fans who just don't care, just consume the next product. So I feel the need to cover this subject because it is something that should be remembered, especially with how quickly people were to go out and buy the Nintendo Switch 2 on release day. Yeah, you folks, you're part of the problem, the Nintendo problem. I guess I should start off by saying there isn't anything wrong with being a Nintendo fan. I'd say despite everything that's happened up to this point, I'm still technically a Nintendo fan. I think it's very easy to forgive Nintendo whenever a major fuck-up happens on their part, since that's usually whisked away by another first-party game that has people throwing their bank information like it's a basketball. That being said, I do think it's important to remember what Nintendo has done, rather than letting the FOMO for a shiny new console cloud your judgment. And like I mentioned already, Nintendo, like any other video game company out there, is running a business. I know, very riveting information nobody already knew. But hear me out for a moment, because since they run a business, they have obligations as one, which often involves protecting their branding and IPs from being replicated or recreated expressly without their permission. That's a normal thing, yes, but the lengths that they go to? Completely overkill at times. Nintendo is well known to have inspired game developers to create their own games, to craft worlds of their own, with a memorable cast of characters to boot. It's not hard to see why so many people are charmed, or rather nostalgic, when it comes to all these franchises that Nintendo has created. Sometimes, extremely creative people make their own spins or take on these existing worlds, either because the IP hasn't had a game in several years, or because they have an idea for a game that they'd like to see be made. So usually these people go out of their way to make these happen on their own accord. Not because they want to make a profit, but because they enjoy these franchises, that there's enough passion to want to make something as a love letter to them. That's the essence of what a fan game is, something made because these people simply love a series enough to want to devote time into it. But as I mentioned before though, Nintendo runs a business here. They can't have just any average Joe somehow make a better product than they could ever hope to produce. So usually these fan games end up getting tossed out because of credible legal threats. Nintendo unfortunately doesn't know how to embrace these fan games with open perspectives, but rather see them as violations of their IPs, unnecessary rivals to their existing or upcoming games that could possibly take away from sales. How dare someone make a good Mario game, even though they aren't making any money off of it? But that's the problem with the whole "we're just protecting our IPs" argument. Why is it that a company like Sega, who is aware of how popular Sonic is as a whole, allows for fan games to exist so long as they make no profit? Is it really the case of defending your IPs, or just trying to be complete control freaks about it all? This has rubbed many creators/teams the wrong way, because it wasn't ever meant to compete with, or be a get-rich-quick scheme that could hurt Nintendo somehow. People make these games because they love your franchises. That's really as basic as it gets, and yet Nintendo still doesn't really understand that fact. Neither do the hardcore fans who are willing to bat for the multi-million-dollar company. Some of these developers do eventually end up coming out with their own games, at the behest of the hardcore Nintendo defenders, but it isn't like they're gonna go out and buy them anyways, and it defeats the whole purpose for why these Nintendo games are even made to exist, and continue to be made to this very day. I suppose while we're at it, we should talk about the biggest elephant in the room here: emulation. It's become abundantly clear by now that everything that's created isn't meant to last for centuries. Eventually, it'll all cease to exist in physical form. I know, saying that seems exaggerated, and you're right, but physical media isn't entirely immune to this, as disk rot is a common issue that affects many video games or movies. Many of the techniques used in manufacturing back then, usually for the sake of saving costs, have come back to bite the many things that we own over the years. Nintendo being the smart cookies they were, they staved off from using discs for as long as they could, until the GameCube rolled out. And for a while their systems only had disc media, until eventually the Switch came out, going back to cartridges at a smaller size this time. Doing so has bought many of these games longer lifespans than your average disc. But eventually, even a cartridge will crumble to dust. That's why the act of preserving the things we love is so important. Doing so would continue the legacy of these games, without having to worry about the condition of them physically for years to come. And with how expensive many of these older Nintendo titles have become over the years due to collectors inflating the prices enough to hurt the used game market, emulating many of these games seems to be the go-to means of enjoying your childhood favorites without having to shell out hundreds of dollars for even just a single game at times. But here's the thing. No, not that thing. Nintendo isn't exactly keen, nor happy about people emulating many of these games so freely, including some of their older titles, which aren't readily available. The current Switch Online membership service, for example, offers a variety of old games for you to play, but it wasn't always like that in the beginning. The only reason we have such a vast library now is because Nintendo drip-fed a lot of it to us over time. It wasn't something they were able to accomplish immediately. You only had a handful of those older games to play, which meant there were many omissions when it first launched. Sure, it's a tall order to ask for everything to be there all at once, but it puts into perspective what the business strategy here seems to be, and because it's something that they expand upon on a monthly basis, it'll take a lot of praying and hoping that the games you want to relive again somehow make the list. And if you want to play any of the N64 or GBA games, you better cough up the extra dough, because they release an expansion pack just for this alone, which doesn't bode well for the future of how they intend to handle future game libraries. This also doesn't entirely guarantee that these games will still remain on the service forever, because I kind of foresee them treating these games like how streaming services treat their movies or shows. We've already seen this happen in one particular case, and maybe it's just the exception to all this, but never say never, I suppose. The reverse engineering that made emulation of these games possible is not something to sneeze at. It's taken many years of constant work for us to get to that point now. If it weren't for the people who cared about preserving these games in the first place, Nintendo would have left many of these titles to rot, which is why they take every opportunity they can to use the hard work of the emulation scene to ironically enough make these games playable again, just on their own terms. The keyword in this instance is control, as in they want to be able to control who does and doesn't get to play these games, even if it hasn't been sold in over 30 plus years. Nintendo just doesn't want anyone to be able to freely play them through an emulator. That means they'd have no control over it, and they probably never will.
Nintendo was right to send those ninjas, Dad.
Shut your mouth!
They've made conscious efforts to send legal threats to websites who've hosted ROMs of many of their games over the years, even taking down whole-ass emulators, as of recently, in an effort to supposedly fight piracy. But what all this seems to really prove to anyone, as far as I'm really concerned, is that Nintendo doesn't want people to be able to have control over their games. Only they want the control, which means they have to be the ones who decide what can and cannot be played in the moment, which is essentially what this latest iteration of Virtual Console for Switch seemingly is. But at least they aren't making you buy each game all over again. It's still their way of having control over the consumer, and trying to punish those who refuse to take part in it. Over the years, Nintendo has and was an affordable video game company, compared to the likes of Sega, Sony, and Microsoft. They even had a way of influencing those in lower income households into purchasing their products. Whether it had been a Game Boy Advance or a GameCube sold at a loss, Nintendo was the go-to video game platform that had not only beloved franchises, but was guaranteed to be a worthy investment for existing or new fans alike. Even when the 8th generation of gaming consoles rolled around, eventually the existence of a Switch Lite would be released to cater to that niche of lower income households, especially for younger kids who wanted a little device to keep entertained on for hours on end. Nobody could compete with what Nintendo had to offer in terms of value. But, as we've come to see as of recently, whether it be due to the tariffs or corporate greed, probably both, this could be the end of affordable console gaming when it comes to Nintendo, unfortunately. Recently, the Switch 2 finally hit store shelves, which despite the negative reception to the pricing, and the demands to lower the price of the thing, people still lined up to purchase it, like a junkie looking to get their fix from their dealer as fast as possible. I don't know if this is because of the FOMO or just the rose-tinted glasses blinding people due to their nostalgia, but it's sold better than the Wii U did at launch supposedly, which now leads us into the predicament that will have consequences on gaming for many years to come. Now I understand that if people are able to afford to do so, they can get a Switch rather easily. I have no doubt that there's people out there who also think it's not all that expensive if their income allows for it. So, if you're one of the people who could do that, good for you. Want a cookie? But that's a smaller majority than you'd actually think. And if anyone was able to purchase it on launch day, they've likely put it on a credit card or are literally eating ice soup for weeks on end. The need for validation on social media often skews the reality that many of these dedicated consumers live, and having known a handful of dedicated Nintendo consumers over the years, they more than likely bought it on a whim without checking their bank balance, because let me tell you, Switch 2 is a huge investment. The console itself, depending on which country you live in, is going to be quite expensive one way or another due to tariffs. Unless you happen to live in Japan by chance, you're paying a hefty sum to get your latest fix of Bing Bing Wahoo Kart Racing, which is an $80 game, might I add. I mean, putting aside the fact that this is a high quality game as usual with their first party titles, there's no way something like this is worth $80 at base price, with no extras thrown in. I remember a time when you pre-ordered a game at nearly that same price point, you'd at least get an art book or some crappy statue. Now they're trying to make it the default price, which might just stick because people couldn't help themselves. And if you think that this is a one-time thing, well, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. And you might bring up the fact that SNES games back in the day were about $84.99. So why is it such a big deal that it's happening again, you might ask? Because it was an awful idea then, and it's an awful idea now. Compound that with the fact that Nintendo rarely prices their games on sale for more than $20 off the original price. This is a standard that shouldn't be taking place in the year of 2025. It isn't like this is some high-budget AAA gaming experience with intense graphics that make your system lag at only 30 FPS or less, like Cyberpunk 2077. This is a fucking Mario Kart game. Don't get me wrong, I love me some Mario Kart, but you have to admit, the $80 price tag is a hard pill to swallow. Even if you can comfortably afford games at that price, you have to wonder how much further the price will go up for these games. And if the rumors of GTA 6 being $100 hold any water, it's about to get so much worse from here on out. But putting the tangent aside for expensive video games for a moment, the Switch 2 also has plenty of accessories that you may or may not want to own, depending ultimately on your needs. Let's say you need another pair of Joy-Con controllers in case you bring a friend over. $94.99. The latest Pro controller that's more familiar to you. $84.99. Maybe you actually plan on using the voice chat feature that took Nintendo nearly almost 18 years to happen. Perhaps you want a camera to utilize all the cool features they advertised in the Direct. $54.99. And you need more space for your brand new console, right? Make sure it's a micro SD express card, otherwise you're screwed. The prices seem to vary on this, but that's another expense to consider because they felt the need to be quirky with it. And the list just goes on with all this. It's actually kind of disappointing in hindsight, and it really makes you wonder what the hell happened to make Nintendo go down this route. Where did it all go wrong? Is it really just tariffs, or something more that they refuse to say aloud? Because it really goes against what it stood for when I was a kid. And it shines a light on them that many people didn't want to acknowledge, until that light was too bright to really ignore. I suppose it all goes back to what I said previously. They run a business, they need to make money to stay afloat, but it doesn't seem to me that Nintendo is hurting at all, with them having a dedicated land at Universal Studios' Epic Universe, the park having opened to the public just about a month ago now. I actually had the chance to check out what the new theme park as a whole had to offer, and it wasn't just a trip to see what Mario and his pals were cooking up, though the food at Toadstool Cafe was better than I expected, despite how expensive it was. Though when I finally went through the warp pipe, it was a surreal experience to just be right there in the Mushroom Kingdom, just being able to see what was another Monday for Mario, with my own eyes. The lines for many of the rides were consistently busy. You'd be waiting 80 to 125 minutes just to get on any of them, which really goes to show you the wide appeal of Nintendo as a whole. You could even interact with the world with an array of amiibo support power-up bands, themed to specific characters for an added variety. But fuck you if you're a Waluigi or Wario fan. Nobody loves you. Of course, each band is about $40 each, which is a lot of coins for such a simple little device that'll let you bing bing wahoo across the land. That's also not including all the merchandise they have to offer, like drinks or popcorn buckets. Your Nintendo superfan will easily be spending a couple $100 at most. It's pretty much to be expected at this point for any theme park, but again, it shows you the appeal Nintendo has as a brand, and how they're capitalizing on the control it has on those dedicated superfans by selling merchandise at a high cost as a business. And that's the direction I fear this is all going. So there's a lot of ground to cover when it comes to Nintendo. especially with their controversies or missteps as a whole. I have some honorable mentions, but it's unrealistic to try and attempt to slay such a dragon, so I really only wanted to talk about the main issues people were having with Nintendo. But there are a few things that I'll mention just because. Like when they shut down an Etsy store for selling Joy-Con Boy skins dedicated to the memory of the late streamer Etika, or when they punished a streamer for playing the latest Zelda button masher a day early because they lived in a different time zone. There's so much that they've done over the years that have just gone under my skin, and I'm not the only person to have witnessed many of these things that Nintendo as a company has done either. And that sucks because I do have a lot of good memories with their games. I do enjoy the things that they come out with, which speaks for the inner child in me especially. And I don't hate Nintendo as I'd like to remind you. That's a strong word in itself. I just dislike the things that they've done. Dislike how anti-consumer they are, how they want to put an end to emulation, how nobody can do anything without them threatening legal action, with how greedy they've gotten with the pricing of their latest console launch. It's enough of an issue that I felt I needed to talk about it, because nobody else seems to have the courage to do it, at least not without getting flamed or dumped on, or having a differing opinion on how Nintendo's morals have fallen. This need for control and immediate profit has taken a turn for the worse this year, and this isn't something that's going to be changing anytime soon, if that wasn't already clear enough. Multi-billion-dollar companies make stupid, questionable decisions all the time now, but as soon as the latest iPhone drops, or another crappy live-action adaptation of a Disney classic comes along, all common sense and reasoning seems to be thrown out for the sake of consumption. Don't think about it, don't ask questions, just consume the next product. A philosophy that's been extremely effective, unfortunately. And that's pretty much how it went down with the Switch 2 releasing this month, because the people who said that they wouldn't buy it, they bought it. It's been pretty comical watching the bigger YouTubers go back on their word, but I have to wonder where people's backbones went. Like, what exactly happened to voting with your wallet here? I guess the memo wasn't taken serious enough in this case, because as of the writing of this script, the Nintendo Switch 2 has sold over 3.5 million consoles in barely a month. Like, I knew that there were going to be people who still bought this, but a number of that is staggering. Nintendo has gone away with a lot over the years, and I don't feel like enough people have really called them out on it. It feels like a vicious cycle with little to no end that people continue to relive because Nintendo was a safe haven for them. This is because they left enough of an impression on us as kids to tolerate or ignore these decisions when they do occur, that we need to deflect, defend, and excuse them due to these positive experiences we've had with them. So this essentially enables Nintendo to keep making decisions that hurt the community, including selling a Mario Kart game at $80 for example. That's still absolutely ridiculous, by the way. So what exactly is the point of making a video like this? Nintendo has already sold 3.5 million units, and probably more by now. People are buying up controllers and accessories like hotcakes, and now it seems $80 games might become the new norm by default. Everyone clearly loves the console. I'm just a poor hater with nothing better to do. Right? Well, despite how well things have been going, the honeymoon phase is already over before it started. The cracks are starting to show, because the Switch 2 is far from perfect, contrary to what people might say online. You think that after years of feedback from consumers, Nintendo would have done something about the Joy-Con drifting issue that's been going on since the first iteration of the Switch, but this problem carries over to the sequel console. Even though they've made an effort to offer free repairs, that's only a temporary fix for our large-scale issue that's happening yet again without any meaningful solution. And never mind the fact that if you needed to fix something in it, you'd have a hard time repairing it yourself, based on the information shared by iFixit, who did an entire teardown explaining why it'd be so difficult to do so. And let's not forget the terrible LCD screen, the battery issue, the Wi-Fi issue, the game key cards issue, the charging money for a tech demo that requires every accessory to 100% complete, the lack of actual new games that aren't ports, $80 video games, being forced to use micro SD express cards, and it just goes on and on and on. It's just frustrating to see people let all these problems slide and continue to give Nintendo their money because of how powerful of a gravitational pull this nostalgia has over them. Because this does affect more than just Nintendo. This can affect the entire industry if it's proven to succeed like this. It enables others to follow suit. We've already seen another $80 game appear, so who's to say there won't be more? The successful launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to have long-term consequences for years to come, and it may not be entirely apparent at first glance, but it shouldn't be all that much of a surprise when people start realizing what's happening. Making a video like this was so important. It highlights all the things that have either been going on over the years or have begun recently that need to be shown to the hardcore fans, even if it's already too late to really do anything about it. There are more people willingly enabling Nintendo than actually calling them out, unfortunately. So it'll be difficult to say how much of an impact something like this leaves, but if you're going to take away anything from this video, it's that Nintendo is slowly changing for better or worse. In some ways, it'll remain the same, while in other ways, it makes you wonder if they've lost the plot along the way, and how far people are willing to tolerate their crusade against emulation, to raising prices on their consoles, to, amiibo figures. Remember when those were $15? I do. There's just a lot of layers to Nintendo that I may have missed or glossed over. And it just goes to show you that underneath all the goodwill over the past decades that they've made, Nintendo is not perfect. No company will ever be perfect. It's just that Nintendo likes to pretend it's close to it, wanting to have control even if it becomes overbearing or harms those within the community that it's fostered over the past handful of decades. And while I doubt there will be a solution to this Nintendo problem, what I can say is that by spreading awareness of it, maybe someday there will be a shift for the better. Perhaps Nintendo will see this, as unlikely as that may be, and make changes that'll benefit consumers and fans alike. So for now, I'll just be the poor hater that makes a video like this, because if you never address it in the first place, how will this problem ever be solved?